Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Shank, I have to say there is something in the law that we call hearsay. And hearsay is inherently unreliable, and we don't allow that in. And in your case, you got hearsay built upon hearsay built upon hearsay. It's inherently unreliable. It's incredible. It's unbelievable. So we don't let that in. You'd have to have 3 exceptions to the hearsay rule to get that in. You got none. You got none. At the law, we call it hearsay. You know what we call it in the world away from law? Gossip, innuendo, deceit. And I have to tell you, it is one of the most pernicious performances I've seen publicly in a long time. I find it interesting, Mr. Chairman, we're having this hearing, given the committee's the Democrats' lack of reaction to the leak of the draft of the Dobbs decision. You held 0 hearings on it. An assassination threat was made. You slow-walked security legislation for Supreme Court justices. But today we're here based on a guy who's telling us a story that someone allegedly told him about somebody allegedly told him. That is what's pernicious here. Politico, it's not a friend of Justice Alito. They spent months trying to corroborate your story. But they said, quote, they said they're unable to locate anyone who heard about the decision directly from either Alito or his wife before its release at the end of June 2014. End of quote. But we're having a hearing today on this topic when the majority have ignored real threats to the Supreme Court over the past year. For example, following the leak of the draft Dobbs decision, daily protests outside the home of Supreme Court justices were encountered trying to sway or influence the Dobbs decision, but we didn't have a hearing on that. In June, Nicholas Roski was arrested outside the home of Justice Brett Kavanaugh after he admitted that he came from California to Maryland to assassinate Justice Kavanaugh, but we didn't have a hearing on that, but we're having a hearing today based on specious defamatory statements. Mr. Paoletta, thanks for being here today. You saw the coverage of the constant protests at the Supreme Court earlier, I believe. What were those protests designed to accomplish, do you think?
The protests beginning in part with Senator Schumer standing on the steps of the Supreme Court and, in my view, physically threatening Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and telling them that if they rule a certain way, they'll pay the consequences. They won't know what hit them. So we also have to remember it went back to Senator Schumer making that threat on the steps of the Supreme Court about what kind of case? An abortion case. And all of these threats, all of these protests are designed to intimidate the justices, but even more so fear for their life. I mean, to intimidate them as justices, but fear for their life. And that's why justices have round-the-clock security now, which I think is unheard of, but it's all caused, right? And let me put it this way. I don't think they're protesting the liberal justices, okay? These are all targeted at the conservative justices and have put their life in danger, all of them.
And the design is to have a long-term impact on the court and on decisions that come out of the court. And you might be aware that the chairman of this committee, Chairman Nadler, and several other members of this committee are supporting legislation to expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court. And a member of this committee tweeted out, the Supreme Court expansion is infrastructure. Why do you think they want to expand the size of the Supreme Court?
For many, many years, the Supreme Court has basically been a super legislature, putting in place sort of policies and essentially laws that they couldn't get enacted through the democratic process. So they want to return to those days and increase the court size so that they can get these policies adopted. It's a terrible development in undermining the legitimacy of the Supreme Court.
We have a Democrat who tweeted out, Republicans stole 2 Supreme Court seats to have a far-right supermajority, and now the court is ready to strip away our fundamental rights, expand the court before it's too late. That corroborates what your premise is. I'll just tell you, I'll close. Mr. Sherman, you asked what would happen if agencies didn't respond to letters from members of Congress. I send 75 to 100 letters a year. I don't get any responses from this administration. Sorry.
The time of the gentleman has expired.